Legacy of a Traitor. Chapter 8. King Genra saw my hesitation and betrayed my tribe. Not a fortnight had passed when a new force appeared in Heaven Nor. They were composed of warriors that had plagued Error for centuries, wretched monsters that the King Shields had fought and died against many times. King Genra announced them as the Sword of the King, though how he obtained their favor was unknown to me, and he began an expansion to the realms beyond Error. The King Shields were relegated to secondary soldiers and servants, and a cold fear gripped my heart. Verse 8 of the Confessional Monolith. Upon seeing this tiny, almost scrawny boy who couldn't be much older than himself, dressed up in a desperately fancy coat of shimmering green scales that was way too big for him, the first instinct Cullen had was to inwardly smirk at the gall of the Genernites to send him intermediaries of intermediaries to accept notices and requests. Then the scrawny boy spoke in the Carfelian tongue, and Cullen found himself reassessing the small figure in surprise. "Greetings, Forager Cullen. You called for me to hear an urgent occurrence." Lord Cernier's quiet voice held barely a semblance of a Generite accent, and he stood before Cullen with a practiced air of dignity that none of the officials had ever commanded. Even Snuffler seemed to be a little impressed, as she refrained from sitting down on the immaculately swept stone floor while he spoke. It made sense, Cullen supposed, that the leader of the reclusive and subtle Genernites would be someone similarly unassuming and intelligent. It still wasn't an indicator that he didn't have terrible plans in store for the valley, but it was certainly jarring to see that Warlord Cernier was so unlike the image of the imposing, armor-clad presence on the center point of the village square. Regardless, Cullen had planned out exactly what to say over the few days he'd spent traveling down the mountains. He bowed his head slightly, setting his face to a grim and empathetic demeanor. "Yes, Lord Cernier, I have come to announce the approaching doom of the Genernites." The boy blinked, then visibly relaxed. "Oh, are you referring to the Lake Wolf threat? Well, worry yourself no longer, for the beast has been captured by our brave guards not even a single day ago." Cullen was confused for a moment, but it made sense to him almost immediately. If his theory about their fear was right, then of course Lord Cernier would think that a simple animal could be interpreted as their doom. Either that, or he saw the Carfelians as so helpless that they would foolishly confuse such a thing. Regardless, that would only make these next words so much harder hitting than Cullen had initially thought. He shook his head solemnly. "No, Lord Cernier. This approaching storm cloud I bear tidings of is far greater than any single beast, or even a great number of beasts. A swarm of swarthy men have been sighted on the far side of the mountains beyond Traveler's Pass, all making their way here." Cullen watched as Lord Cernier remained silent for a moment, before a concerned annoyance appeared on his barely mustachioed face. "The way up the mountainside is practically impossible to traverse for a single person after the landslide destroyed the path many years ago, let alone such a force that you are claiming. If you are attempting to delude me with a poorly invented tale out of a desperate desire for further Cerny, then know that I can provide some aid, primarily due to your excellent deliveries in the past. Otherwise, kindly leave this place at once." Despite the sudden and unexpected appreciation, it was going just as he'd planned. Cullen continued. "Of course, what I said is unbelievable to any rational mind. To think that there are those with the iron will and sheer numbers to try traveling up thousands of feet of rocky inclines and dangerous forests is utterly ridiculous. Why, I'd have never believed it myself if someone told me. As such, I've brought proof of this brave band of mountaineers." Cullen reached into his satchel, rummaging around for effect, though both objects were too big to be missed at all. He yanked out both pieces of armor at the same time, raising them above his head with a flourish. "The clothes of the Legion of Crimson and Brown!" Lord Cernier's eyes grew wide as he looked at them, and his face became deathly pale. Cullen was ecstatic, and it was a struggle to make sure his inward smile didn't break through onto his face. Such an extreme reaction was already more than he could have hoped for. "Secondly, to prove they were seen at Traveler's Pass, here is an old Generite blade found in its ruins while I was up there." Cullen offered the dagger hilt first, but Lord Cernier barely looked at it. Instead, he had snatched one, then the other of the armor pieces from Cullen, staring at them and tracing the symbols on the front with his finger. "Markelt. Rotrar," he whispered, probably some sort of curse in the Generite language. He looked back up at Cullen and spoke in a low yet forceful voice. "Tell me, were these people holding curved blades, and did they have beards larger than any of the Genernites here?" Cullen blinked in surprise. "That they did, among other strange objects that have never been seen in the valley before." Did Lord Cernier know of these merchants? If so, they must have been active in the far lands well before the Generites ever entered the valley. In that case, the fact that he showed such fear meant that they did pose a threat to his rule. Cullen regained his composure and continued. Why, these and every other thing they'd bring to the valley would be unlike anything seen within our simple land. Cullen waved his arms about to illustrate his point, letting his voice take on the emotive tone that his father had mastered when telling a story of growing dread. If their presence is strong enough, they may very well rule over us all, in your place. He held his face in his hands, shivering in mock fear. If something isn't done, you'll find all of us Carfelians bowing down before these outsiders. Will decades of your most gracious efforts to care for us go to waste so quickly? If the Generites were already scared of these outsiders, then Cullen wouldn't even need to use the lie that they were the beast men from the tales. All the better for establishing a good relationship with the new merchants when they arrived. Lord Cernier's pallor hadn't dulled. He whispered quickly and with fearful intensity. How did you get these? No, where did you get these exactly? Did they give them to you, or were they taken without their will? He glanced back and forth across the hall. And does anyone else know of it? His fear was even more acute than Cullen could have possibly imagined. This string of questions had almost none of the initial dignity that Lord Cernier had introduced himself with, and Cullen found himself doubting the notion that any deception or exaggeration was necessary in the first place. Well, if you wish, Lord Cernier, I could speak with you someplace away from everyone if it give you peace of mind. Considering that they were still speaking in Carfelian, there probably weren't many potential eavesdroppers, but Cullen wanted to use every trick he could to get into his good graces. To answer your last question first, no. I simply told that servant with the cloud-looking poofy scarf that I brought news of doom. Beyond him, no one else knows, aside from Snuffler here. I see. That's excellent, that's good. Lord Cernier took a deep breath, and he managed to regain a portion of his composure. A tiny portion. There is a study room for the officers a little ways up this stairwell. If you don't mind the climb, it would be a good place to fully inform me. The information you provide there will be worth your weight in Cerny, provided we persevere through this threat upon the valley. A threat upon your valley, perhaps, Cullen thought, but he smiled and nodded. It would be my pleasure. May Snuffler join us? She tends to feel rather lone. Of course, anything you need. At that curt approval, Lord Cernier turned and began climbing the stairwell quickly. One of the other Generites, an older guard who was watching from a relaxed position, asked him something in their language, but a swift reply from the boy seemed to provide a satisfactory answer, though the wrinkled man continued to look at Cullen with an inquisitive eye. Cullen shrugged and followed after Lord Cernier, motioning for Snuffler to follow. The many doorways that ringed the walls of the enormous tower interior reminded him of his father's worries about secret dungeons, but this didn't seem to have any elements of a trap, at least, not yet. The fear that Lord Cernier had shown was almost certainly real. Unless the Generites could shapeshift like some sort of storied monster, there was no way that it could be a pure manipulation. Even so, he still had to be careful not to underestimate the snakes, as there must be a good reason as to why this small, scared kid was ruling over them. Keep an eye out, Snuff, Cullen whispered. She grunted in affirmative, and they continued up. The stairwell was steep, but nothing compared to the mountains. Even so, Lord Cernier was breathing heavily by the time they had made it a third of the way through the height of the tower, about 100 feet up. Was simply walking around the building the limit of his physical exertion? Aside from his knowledge and initial demeanor, there really seemed to be nothing special about him whatsoever. Come on, Cullen thought. I must be missing something. Before he could ask Lord Cernier about the Generite's method for choosing a leader, the boy moved down one of the pale bridges branching off the side of the stairwell and paused at the shiny doorway just beyond it. We've arrived, so hurry inside, quickly. As Cullen followed him through the metallic doorway, noting what a ridiculous waste of good steel it was, he found the inside somehow cozy. The ceiling was a lot lower than the cavernous main hall, and the walls were a less vibrant color of painted turquoise than the sharp blue and green everywhere else. A small set of bookshelves stood behind a table with a few cloth-covered seats around it, and a warm-looking globe like a toy imitation of the sun hung from the ceiling. It was no vista, but Cullen could tell his guard was lessened just by being here. Was that why Lord Cernier had chosen it? You can close the door. We will be secure here. Lord Cernier placed the armor pieces against the wall, selected a book from the shelf, and sat upon the chair opposite the door as Cullen slowly did so. He looked carefully for some sort of machinery on the doorway that might automatically interlock with the carved wood, but the keyhole showed that the door was just needlessly expensive after all. Take a seat or stand, whichever you prefer. As Snuffler immediately jumped upon one of the seats, its creaking protests nearly giving way to a splintering snap under her weight, Cullen wondered if there was some trick to all of this hospitality. Though he was able to keep his mind focused, the thrill of being so deep in the sanctum of his enemies were causing several absurd thoughts to worm their way into his analysis. If they weren't seeking to physically trap him yet, was this comfy location part of a plan to catch Cullen in his words if he lied at all? But if they knew they were lies, then the Degenerites have a way of communicating outside the valley. If so, were they allies with the newcomers, hiring them as a weapon against the Carfelians somehow? Now I'm starting to sound like father. Cullen ignored the silly concept, smiling cordially. I'll stand. It helps me stay calm in such a worrying situation. Well, if he was sounding like his father at all, he'll just make use of all the old storyteller's skills to make this report as persuasive as possible. Lord Cernier nodded, setting the yellow-trimmed book on the table and folding his hands over it. I need you to tell me everything you saw upon the mountains. The tiniest detail may very well be the difference between our salvation and destruction, provided our doom isn't already inevitable. Though he'd positioned them to hide it, his hands were moving very slightly with a tremor of fear. It was all but assured. There was no trap or deception. Lord Cernier was absolutely terrified, and far more so than he was letting on. Cullen would simply provide the truth, though it wouldn't hurt if it was described in a slightly dramatic way. He bowed again, barely concealing his smile. I assure you, I will do everything I can to ensure that this threat shall do no harm to the Carfelian Valley. My discovery began when I left for the mountains only a couple weeks ago. As Cullen related his journey, he used as many tricks that he could think of. He expressed the intensity of traveling up the mountains, putting each action into movement as he described it. He softened his voice for moments of stealthy concern and tension, then raised it suddenly like the eruption of the crimson flower, accentuating the moments of action with imitations of the sounds. Every sentence Cullen spoke was accurate, though he admitted the reason for the expedition being earlier than usual, as well as his distaste for the quota increase. That would be better suited for when the negotiations began. He'd considered skipping over his discovery of the Generite's bones as well, but in the whirl of the storytelling he ended up including it. Was it because instilling the idea of a dead Generite would only inflame Lord Cernier's fear, or did it have something to do with the nagging in his chest? Either way, and to Cullen's surprise, Lord Cernier seemed fairly unconcerned at the information of the bones, only closing his eyes for a few seconds in thought. So he had known there were bodies that remained in Traveler's Pass. Given everything he'd seen so far, Cullen could only chalk it up to a fear of further casualties caused by an attempted retrieval, but something still felt off. However, there was no time to dwell on it now, as Cullen was beginning his description of the first sighting of the outsiders. Even though he gave it all the looming horror and gravitas that he imagined Lord Cernier was feeling at the moment, Snuffler just yawned, curling up in the soft chair and beginning a little nap. Such a difference between the peaceful beast and the frightened ruler was undeniably funny to Cullen. He had just spoken of the outsiders' camp and the road they were building when a detail caused Lord Cernier to interrupt. They've learned how to control reptilian creatures as beasts of burden? Cullen paused, wondering why that detail alone had caught his attention, and not all of the special equipment they were carrying. Lord Cernier whispered to himself, inadvertently loud enough that Cullen could still hear it. They can't be sea dragons, can they? He flipped through his book, and though Cullen tried to get a glimpse of it, he could only see a blink's worth of animal designs and mostly just the same twisting text of the Generites. Cullen scratched his head, trying to remember all of his father's stories on the matter. Well, they didn't have wings, so I don't know if they could be called dragons in the usual sense. Also, every story with them I've heard said they could breathe out flames, and if they lived in the sea, someplace which has way more water than the lake, it would douse them over and over again. Lord Cernier shook his head. Forgive my outburst. It can be ignored. I was jumping to conclusions. I'm sure they're not dragons, just large lizards, so please continue. Nodding, Cullen relayed the return up the mountain, emphasizing the fear he felt in the close call involving the clearing, crimson smoke bulbs, and Snuffler's save with the bloodflies through the suspenseful tone of his voice and the tremor he allowed into it. It was as contagious as he'd hoped, and Lord Cernier looked terrified, yet a shadow of curiosity appeared on the Generite's face for a moment. These bloodflies, are they possible to propagate in a garden environment? Though it was obvious Lord Cernier had never heard of them, the sheer stupidity of the notion caused Cullen to narrow his eyes, slightly breaking his momentum. Lord Cernier, are you a mountain boar? Am I? No, is this some sort of idiom I'm unfamiliar with? Snuffler here has skin strong enough to turn away some legwolf bites. If anyone else uses these foul insects for any more than a few seconds, they're bound to come away with more wounds than their enemy. I should know. You'd probably be better off trying to train a full pack of those land-prancing fish than even going near a nest of bloodflies, much less using them against these outsiders. And yet that was how Snuffler, you said. How Snuffler scared them away. Lord Cernier rubbed his chin, and Cullen wondered how many Genernites would have fly scars if they ever traveled far enough up the peaks to find the nests. Were you able to find out anything further about these outsiders? Well, that was pretty much all of it. After that, I immediately descended the mountains and rushed to the Citadel as fast as I could to give a report on what I'd seen, as I was sure you would know the best solution to this overwhelming issue. Cullen could tell that though it was partially hidden, Lord Cernier's blinking eyes and strained breath showed that he was holding back feelings of anguish. How long before they arrive? The way they were organized, I wouldn't be surprised to see their scouts in the valley in a little less than a month, maybe even sooner than that. Well, that was a fairly generous estimate. If they continued to argue and move as Cullen had seen them, they probably wouldn't make it into the valley for another 5 or 6 weeks. If they don't get stuck in the snowfall, that is. Still, they might have something up their collective sleeves, so we couldn't call it a complete lie. Lord Cernier sat back in his chair, or slumped more like, and closed his eyes as he let out a shivering sigh. If it comes to it, the citadels will provide safety for everyone. Is there truly nothing else you could glean? Cullen had prepared and executed this plan perfectly, and he could feel the thud of his heart as he prepared to begin the next step. He'd been unsure if it was even feasible before, but now Lord Cernier was effectively his to control. Cullen could say anything, and if it would give the Genernite the slightest perception of safety or chance of victory, he would take it. Lord Cernier, not all is lost. You see, we Carfelians have our own secrets. If I'm given the chance, my knowledge of the mountains will let me sneak all around their operations, and perhaps I can even call upon the figures from our old tales to aid us in this time of strife, but it may take me a while. And there is something that I fear would prevent me, something only you could aid me with. He sniffed. You see, my father is all I have left in this world, and I care more about him than any other person in this whole valley. But if I were to go off on a quest for so long, how could I ensure he was still safe and well until my return? He shook his head sorrowfully. If only I could keep up with the quota and pay someone to care for him at the same time, then I could accept such a responsibility. Alas, I fear that even with a small reward, I won't have enough Cerny to do so. Your desires would be better asked directly. Lord Cernier was focused as he took a small piece of emerald-colored vellum on the table and began writing on it with a quill and inkpot. I accept. If you can somehow provide us with a way to stop them, you may have as much Cerny as you desire. He closed his eyes again, as if struggling with a choice before speaking quickly. Here, you may have 2,000 right now. 2,000! Cullen had only hoped for a few hundred at most as the full reward. This alone would be enough to keep his father in luxury for a year or more. A sense of great opportunity was beginning to grow in his chest, and Cullen began speaking without fully realizing what he was saying. Your kindness is wonderful, Lord Cernier, thank you. I will strive to end this threat with all I have. And yet, despite the strength of the Genernites, I still fear for my brethren. There are certain friends of mine, Carfelians across the valley, who would be able to keep many others in the far reaches of our land from the influence of these outsiders, if only they had the strength granted by the secrets your people wield. If Yeeg and some of the others were given secret Genernite weapons, they could defend his father and the other villagers from both the beasts of the wilderness and the Genernites themselves if any plots were attempted. The Carfelians' victory would be even closer at hand. This was such a long shot, much more so than even the Cerny, but Cullen was feeling bold. But was it too bold? Maybe he had crossed a line. Of course, that is wise. If there are as many approaching as you reported, such unity will be necessary. I can grant access to the forges and the gardens for a small number of Carfelians, but these must still be kept in confidence. I trust you can choose such individuals as are best suited for this gift. Lord Cernier continued to write as Cullen blinked in shock. This wasn't some sort of dream, was it? All of his hopes and desires were coming to pass. The Genernites' fear, the possibility of preparing the people of the valley against their slow control, funds to allow him and his father to live as they wished, it was all coming true. He glanced back at the doorway, wondering with a jolt if this was simply a way to entice them and trap him, but he couldn't sense anyone beyond the door yet. Then Lord Cernier continued speaking. But you must listen. If I do this for you, then I need something else in return. You must not speak of these outsiders upon the valley and their threat to anyone, even those whom you choose for this privilege. If you do, madness will spread and engulf us in chaos even before they arrive and put an end to everything. Again, you truly did not say anything of this to anyone before you arrived. No, of course not. Cullen was glad he could tell the truth here, as he hadn't even stopped by his father's house before reaching the citadel, but the sudden intensity from Lord Cernier had surprised him. It made sense when considering the upcoming celebrational feast, he supposed, as all of the excitement for it would be undercut by the news. That feast was probably the last chance the Genernites had to get back in the good graces of the Carfelians before their rivals arrived. And yes, I promise not to speak a word of them to anyone outside this room. Lord Cernier sighed in relief, as if a weight had been lifted off of him. Good, thank you. You will provide as much reconnaissance as possible, yes? Cullen nodded. Absolutely. I'll snoop around their camp and beyond for every last secret, and I might even find allies in our struggle against them. In any case, you can expect my return and my full report to be ahead of their arrival, unless something unthinkable happens to me up there. He suddenly felt a lump in his throat as a whisper of the fear he had felt in the mountains pierced up from his mind's depths through all the excitement. Though he tried to ignore it, a new request suddenly spilled from his mouth. If I don't return, please continue to support my father. If nothing else, that's all I ask. Why did he say that? Why did he feel this way? This journey wouldn't be that dangerous, and begging like that to the Genernites, especially now, was ridiculous. He had to get his thoughts under control. And yet, Cullen could see that beyond the fear in the Genernites' eyes, Lord Cernier had a flash of something else upon hearing that request. Understanding? Empathy? The boy spoke again, his words laced with a resolve that Cullen hadn't heard before. Forager Cullen, I give you my word. Upon the name of Lord Cernier, no harm shall befall your father. Cullen was stunned for a moment, and even Snuffler perked up, raising an ear at hearing the determined tone coming from the Genernite. Thank you, he said quietly. Then he smiled. I'll hold you to that from beyond the grave, you know. Lord Cernier nodded. He opened a small drawer built into the desk and took out a small chest the size of his hand. After fiddling with the latch, he lifted the tiny lid and took out several objects that looked like Cerny at first, but they were made of a green metal that glimmered in the sphere light just like the dagger on the table, and a small face was in the place of where the Cerny's hole should be. The stories that Cullen had heard many times from his father often spoke of faraway lands using images of their leaders as currency, and it seemed that the Genernites had been no different. It must have been annoying to constantly make a whole new batch of these whenever some old man died, so Cullen could see why they had switched to the clay rings. These are coins from my family's old home. There are none like it in all the valley, nor could any ever be made here. They will serve as proof of your choice of allies, and my gift to the Carfelians. Cullen picked up one of the coins and held it close to his eye. The side view of the man depicted on the coin had long hair that reached his armor-covered shoulders, and a mean glare that was only heightened by the long scar that stretched from his ear to his slightly bearded chin. I take it the old fellow with the scar here is long gone, huh? It's been a long while since these were in use, I can tell. Lord Cernier nodded. That was the image of my progenitor and great-great-grandfather, Lord Thenier Cernier. He defended our home from an oncoming force back when we lived in the Emerald Hills and the town of Mistbay. We'll need his blessing more than ever. Cullen couldn't help but wince at the mention of the dead man's name. Even if he was a Genernite, no one deserved to be torn between realms. Lord Cernier looked at the coins in his hand with a solemn expression for a moment before speaking again. I suppose this is the first of our secrets you have been granted access to. He handed Cullen 4 more of the coins as well as the parchment. Show one of these alongside my message to any merchant or officer of the Citadel, and they will provide you with what you need. If it is split or broken in any way, it will be considered forfeit. Now go at once. We have no time to waste. Cullen bowed one last time, and whistled for Snuffler to follow him as he burst through the door. She leapt from the chair, the force of it causing the poor thing to finally break apart with a crash. We'll just include that in our endless reward. Don't worry about it, girl, he told her as they reached the stairwell, descending with a speed that made many of the nearby Genernites jump back in fright. In spite of himself, he smiled at that. It seemed some things remained the same wherever they went. As they ran, Cullen went over and over what had happened in the last few minutes, and it still felt impossible to him every time. A new era was coming, and Cullen would be the first to meet it. First things first, he would borrow a cart from one of the Carfelian merchants, and load it up with as many weapons, tools, and supplies as he could muster. Though it would be so easy to simply tell everyone about what he had seen on the mountain, ignoring the final stipulation that Lord Cernier had given him, there was something about the earnestness that the young lord had in his eyes, the sheer humanity there that made such a notion feel unthinkable. It was a horribly weak and flawed humanity for the most part, yes, but still a flare of something that Cullen knew he could never betray. There was no deception in his promise to keep Cullen's father safe. "So, what shall we tell the village folks, Snuff? It's easy enough to say that we were simply sent on an expedition to find special plants beyond the valley, but do you think that's believable enough?" They reached the bottom of the stairwell, and were momentarily stopped by two younger guards who had joined the old one at the sound of the Carpathian pair's descent. Cullen held up the paper that granted him power over everyone in this citadel, at least in a certain manner of thinking, and they led him by with a surprised and possibly reverent look. Cullen indulged in this newfound authority for a moment with a grin, before continuing his planning with Snuffler as they crossed the gigantic hall. No, our excuse has to be something more than that, or else they might be suspicious of our missing the feast. Cullen snapped his fingers. Maybe if these plants we were sent to find were part of a legendary garden that was nearly dead. Maybe a whole grove of stone got left behind in the ruins of Traveler's Pass. Perhaps I discovered it while searching the pass on my last trip, and now that it's open to the snow and wind, the delectable fruits are not long for our world. By the time they were passing over the sand of the quota processing courtyard, which was probably all kicked up and disheveled because the Generites had been too lazy to rake it for the past 2 weeks, Cullen had nearly completed his strategy for keeping this secret mission secret. Of course, such an excuse will give me all the time I need due to the inevitable snow near the pass, and the lack of any specific location of the garden itself. And when I return, bearing no stone gut, everyone will simply assume I was just a little too late to save it. Any thoughts on that, girl? Unfortunately, Snuffler didn't seem to care about much at the moment aside from the smell of something very tasty in the village. She smacked her lips in excitement and began to run across the bridge with a renewed speed that even the urgent mission had failed to instill within her. Cullen shouted a "Watch out!" for both his companion and the people gathered around the stall of spiced apple cordial being served in the village square, the smell of which hit him with such force that it nearly caused him to stumble onto the cobblestone. Old Galila must have noticed the oncoming cold and had begun selling her special winter brew. It just so happened that this version of her cordial was Cullen's favorite, and he was able to catch up to Snuffler with just a few moments to spare. The elderly vendor had been surrounded by several Carfelians and one of the Generite officers, all bundled up in winter vests and shawls and eagerly awaiting their turn to purchase the refreshment. However, upon seeing the porcine juggernaut stampeding towards them, they had dispersed, some onto their rears, all across the square. As Cullen leapt onto Snuffler with a grand tackle, she stopped with a crash and tumble that left the two of them only inches from old Galila's feet.
"Goodness, little Cullen, are you and Snuffy all right?"
Yep, just fine."
Cullen groaned as he got up slowly, making sure all of his bones were still in place as Snuffler shook her dazed head, grunting in apology.
"I'm afraid she was just a little excited, both from the delicious scent you've unleashed on our cold world and because of the impending mission we've been given by our Generite ruler, Lord Cernir."
He did his best to ensure that it struck a balance between casual and boastful, but he wasn't sure if he pulled it off.
"A mission? Is it secret?
Huh? Come on, tell us, Cullen."
A few of the villagers helped him up, and others were making sure Snuffler was feeling fine. Most seemed to be from the inner village, and though Cullen didn't know their names, he'd seen them plenty of times when bringing his quota to the citadel. They didn't seem too bothered by the whole ordeal, though the officer still looked apprehensively at Cullen and Snuffler.
I suppose I can say that it will be a dangerous trek that will take me a few weeks, one that will reward us with a wealth of stone gut unlike anything we've ever seen."
"A few weeks? Oh, but then you'll miss the celebrational feast. Are you sure you must go immediately?"
Old Galila looked unusually concerned, and somehow Cullen felt bad about telling her that.
Well, yes. What I'm searching for might not be there in just a few days, so it's absolutely essential that I leave as soon as possible. But I'm sure there will be other feasts in the future, and they'll be even more of a delight than this one.
"If you're so determined, then I suppose there's not much I can say to change your mind, it being a special mission and all. In that case, wait here a second."
Old Galila turned around, but instead of reaching for one of the bottles of spiced cordial that Cullen had expected, she rummaged through a small chest that she stored her profits in. Within a moment, she was handing him a bundle of cloth, folded like a cloak and colored with many different hues.
"That's a little feastal thank you gift for one of my best and cutest customers."
Cullen didn't like that term for himself very much either. He'd rank it at around the same level as mountain goat, but such a gift was still a very kind gesture. He smiled. You shouldn't have, Miss Galila. Thank you so much." He unfolded it and held it up. It seemed a little big. But how did you know my size? I don't recall having any measures of myself recently."
Oh, that's not for you to wear, silly. That's Snuffler's cloak. She's just a little cuter than you, I'm afraid.
Cullen breathed a shy sigh of relief amidst the laughter of some of the villagers.
It was going to be saved for the celebrational feast itself, but since you'll be so far away, I want you to have it now. After all, you get to be all bundled up there in the cold mountains, but poor Snuffler has to wear nothing but her own skin.
Cullen was fitting the cloak on the mountain boar, who seemed quite pleased with all of the attention, albeit with a little bit of difficulty, as the vesture seemed slightly tight. Whenever the measurements were taken, they couldn't have been too recent. Nevertheless, that just showed how much time she'd spent on this, and Cullen couldn't help but feel touched by the effort.
Well, I'm sure she'll be snug and toasty with this. I appreciate it, Miss Galila. Say, in return, why don't I buy everyone at the feast a round of this delicious cordial? With that, he strode up to the officer and held out the paper and one of the coins. Old Galila gasped.
Oh my! Are you sure, Cullen? There'll be nearly everyone in the village attending, if not more.
Which is why it will take at least 500 cerni, yes? Well, that is what I can give in advance. If you need more, I'll supply it on my return. Everyone looked at Cullen in shock, a few glancing at the officer, who was now reading the note with wide eyes.
What? Is that true? Cullen's that rich? What kind of magic treasure were you sent to find?
The villagers all swarmed around him, and Cullen pretended to be surprised by their pushing, allowing himself to enjoy the sudden fame a little bit. After a moment, the General Knight nodded slowly, staring at Cullen.
Lady Galila, you will have 500 cerni, as he desires.
And on top of that, I would like a small keg to take with me when I leave town, as I'd like to keep Snuffler's best customer title around for a while longer. Cullen took out 30 clay rings from his own satchel, and handed them to the awestruck old woman with another gleaming grin. There, that would quiet all of the concerns he was harboring about missing this feast, all the concerns that he'd scarcely realized existed at all. Just preserve some of that liquid joy for me upon my return, all right? Before they could say anything else, Cullen had taken back the note and the coin and was waving farewell to the crowd, Snuffler following a little slower than before as her new cloak was billowing out behind her. Yeah, if that was the last they saw of him, that would leave only good memories. He blinked and shook his head. What was he thinking? Of course this wasn't the last time he'd returned to the village. Why was he so concerned? He needed to speak with Yeeg and tell him all of the great news that had been obtained at the Citadel. That would get these odd notions out of his head in no time at all. There was an opportunity for peaceful rebellion on the horizon, and that could only happen if Yeeg and the other Carfelians were in place and prepared with the weapons and the Generite tools to back them up. Such a rebellion wouldn't happen for at least several months, but surely it would be better to have it prepared as soon as possible. And besides, Yeeg was one of the few who could check in and care for his father, so Cullen needed to pay him to do so for as long as was necessary. Not forever, of course, just for a couple months, or maybe a few years. His father probably had about 10 years left, so if Cullen gave Yeeg the rest of the cerni, that would surely be enough to keep him safe during Cullen's absence. Right, that's enough of that. Yeeg will be at Hina's brewery, surely, so we can talk to him and plan out our temporary absence. Right, Snuffler? She glanced up at him as they slowed near the south street. Yeah, she could sense his unease as well, he could tell. Such a feeling was probably just a side effect of how fast everything was happening, and so the best way to deal with it was to simply meet it just as quickly. That's all. By the time they entered the brewery, Cullen had tucked away the curling tension in his stomach and waved to the farmer sitting in his usual spot with a practiced smile and greeting. Good, he wasn't accompanied by anyone else. He'd half expected Michael to be here as well, or perhaps one of Yeeg's family, but everyone else must be busy with the preparations. It was lucky Yeeg wasn't similarly occupied. The farmer glanced up and grinned.
Ah, welcome back from the peaks, Cullen. Gotta say, you're here a little earlier than usual. What has it been, less than 10 days? I'd expected you were about to miss out on the celebrational feast, but more's the merrier.
Cullen pulled up a chair and Snuffler lay at his feet again, eyeing the bar in the watchful gaze of Mrs. Hina. I'm afraid your intuition may be a bit too accurate. Snuffler and I can't stay and chat for long today.
Then it seems we've caught each other at just the right time, as I won't be here long either. I'm just picking up an order of cider from my wife. Our family's famous crisp bread can't be made for the feast without its secret ingredient, after all. Besides, now that you're here, our other plans need to be sped up something fierce.
He laughed, but then looked at Cullen again with a curious glance.
Unless you're saying that you'll be gone for the feast as a whole.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. On top of that unfortunate news, I'll probably be gone for a lot longer than usual, so I had a few special requests. Yeeg now looked concerned.
Kid, is it a problem of funds? You know I can always help if you're running into trouble.
No, that's not it. In fact, Lord Sernir has given me a rather massive sum of wealth and power, and I intend on having you share it with me. I just need to honor my end of the deal with him, which may take a while. As such, could you take some time every day for a few months or so to check on my father, for a sum of about 1,000 cerni? Yig coughed, nearly spewing his drink across the table.
What? 1,000? That's more than I make in a year, even with a bumper crop. What's that CERN you're having you do?
Cullen smiled. I'm honor-bound to not tell anyone else about that part, unfortunately. Despite that, I can say that it involves something wonderful for all of us that I need to retrieve beyond the peaks, something Lord Sernir is determined to bring about by any means necessary. You'll have to trust me on this.
More than that, I'll trust that your heart and mind aren't so easily bought. It wasn't a month ago you were complaining about them, and now you're singing their praises. Imagine what old Arthas would think of that, his own flesh and blood turned by Cerny.
Yeek laughed, his attempt at humor barely masking his curiosity.
Nah, you're too hard-headed for that to work.
He lowered his voice as Cullen's heart skipped a beat.
We're not in any danger, yeah?
Though he tried to respond immediately, Cullen could tell that he'd let too much be revealed with just a few sentences. Either that, or he'd underestimated his ally, who had listened to many of his father's stories as well. No, not at all. We Carfelians won't have anything to worry about, I promise. Our overlord's a bit of a scaredy squirrel. Look, I can't go into any more detail. I just need you to swear that you'll take care of him for as long as it takes, no matter how many days that is. Yeek nodded.
Well, you're pretty certain about this. Right, I promise, and don't worry yourself about the full payment. Even with the raised quota, it's no issue. Your pa's an old friend of mine. It's a pleasure to help in any way I can.
Thanks, Yeeg. I appreciate that. He tried to say something more, something that would satisfy the returned and accursed lump in his throat, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, Cullen tapped the table and put on his practiced smile again. There's actually a little more I'm offering than just the money, but it might be more of a request than a gift. Lord Sernir's granted me access to any tools, weapons, and devices the Generites have for sale, as well as those they don't, including special access to their gardens and forges inside the Citadel. Yeeg's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. Cullen continued. I know this is crazy, but it's entirely true. Lord Sernir sees that it's a wise step to take, and so this privilege can be granted to a tiny handful of people beyond myself. I would like you to be one of them.
That's a whole lot of responsibility. Are you sure about this?
Absolutely. I can't use this gift while I'm away, so I'd like you to take a look in the depths of the Citadel for me and learn all you can. While you're there, take a few of these tools, plants, and techniques that the Generites have been keeping from us all these years, and store them in a safe place in case they change their mind about sharing their secrets. Preferably not with Mr. Frenet or the other inner villagers. Yeeg narrowed his eyes and took another sip.
I thought this was a gift from Lord Sernir himself for the good of us all. Why would we be excluding some of the others, friends at that, from all this? The only way I see you wanting such a thing is if you're anticipating that the Generites will betray us.
The farmer shrugged.
Look, so long as old Arthas hasn't convinced you to resort to violence and lies against the Generites, I'll be happy to help, but there's something that just doesn't sit right about this.
Cullen shook his head. This stuff won't be used for any dubious means, and it only found its way into my hands through the generosity of the Generites. Believe me, I'm just as shocked as you are that I truly mean that. I don't intend to use them to cause any sort of bloodshed, I assure you, but I still think they might be fickle and demand everything back when they think they can get away with it. He gestured to the road outside, where some people had gathered. They might be friends, but there are plenty of villagers who would do whatever the Generites demand if it meant getting in their good graces, even if it would eventually lead down a dark path. Finally, after another couple agonizingly long seconds, Yeeg finally nodded.
Well, consider me persuaded. I'll trust you on this too, but I'm not betraying anyone who hasn't done anything to deserve such a turn. If you're speaking the truth, there'll be no problem. Now, how will Lord Sernir know you chose me?
Cullen took out one of the old emerald coins and handed it to Yeeg. All you have to do is show this to any of the Generites, and the secrets of the Citadel shall be laid bare to you. And if you have time, getting into contact and giving a coin to some of the other Carfelians near the other citadels could prove really useful too. Cullen hadn't spent much time in the farther parts of the valley outside of short and somewhat disappointing foraging efforts, so he didn't really have anyone to even name. Yeeg, on the other hand, could make a lifelong friend in half a day, considering how he spoke to everyone at the festivals in the past, so surely he would be able to find some good allies. The farmer scratched his head.
That makes 3 requests, and this one's a fairly large ask at that, too. I'm not as good as you are at making stories, so I might not be able to provide too many excuses for traveling around.
There's no reason why it needs to be done immediately. Here, I'll leave them with my father after my bartering today, as that's where they'll be safest, and you are welcome to come by and pick up the rest whenever you think you can over the course of the next few weeks. Does that sound good to you? Yeek nodded.
Sure thing, Cullen.
It looked like he wanted to say something further, but a call from the back of the brewery for him interrupted whatever it was.
That'll be for me. I'd better hurry along. I'm late as it is, but I want you to get something through your head.
He grasped Cullen's shoulders with a firm stance, jolting the forager out of his conversational demeanor for a split second.
Whatever you're doing up in the mountains for them, be careful. Old Arthas cares about you two more than anyone, and he wouldn't want you to get yourselves killed for him. You got that?
Yeah, understood.
Good. I'll be seeing you around then. If not at the feast, then the next time we have drinks here. There'll be a special brew for you, so you'd best be there.
Of course, thanks. See you then, Yeek. As the farmer left, Cullen suddenly felt oddly vulnerable, almost exposed by his parting words. Why was everyone so worried about him? Were they all that suspicious of the Generites that they couldn't imagine such gifts being given away without an impossible mission? No, if that was the case, Cullen would have considered that before everyone else. But then why the weird behavior? Come on, Snuff. Let's get some supplies and get out of the village. We've got better things to do than worry about stuff that doesn't matter. But as soon as he got up, a short laugh of disbelief from behind him made Cullen's blood run cold. Now I'm insulted. You're not leaving without buying something at my family's brewery with all that wealth, right? He spun around with a jolt, nearly falling onto the table as Tharina Hina emerged from behind a wooden barrel near the corner of the room and grinned at him with all the satisfaction of a successful hunter. What, are those Generites making you capture the mountain spirit himself or something insane like that? How dangerous is this mission of yours to make it, Mr. Russell, that concerned? The absolute gall of this girl. She must have hidden as soon as she heard Cullen and Snuffler approaching. That was a private conversation, Hina. Is this snooping and spying the sort of thing patrons should expect at your establishment? He regained his composure and assumed a calm stance, though the shock had given way to distilled infuriation. And maybe I was thinking about spending some of that reward here, but you've put quite the hamper on that desire. He narrowed his eyes at her as a sickening realization reached him. You heard everything, didn't you? Sorry, not much I could do about that. If I had moved, you would have seen me. Anyway, since it looks like you've got a few more of those coin things, how about letting someone who can really make use of those Generite secrets join in? Come on, just imagine what She coughed. I mean, all of us Carfelians could make with full reign over all the Citadel tech. The sheer quality of the metal that we see in their small tools could be used to make amplifiers that could rival the water wheels. Have you ever imagined a system of gears that could create enough force to lift stone and could be used by one puny guy? I have, and so I need to use that forge and all the metal they have. And why should I listen to you? You might cause something to blow up, and then they would never allow us to touch the stuff again. That's a stupid argument, and you know it. I've actually put the work into learning their weird language, so as long as I'm careful, nothing bad will happen. Besides, you brushed this off, but Mr. Russell and I both know that there's something else about this mission that we really ought to be aware of. At the very least, you can let me prepare for it by using those forges, or else I'll have to make sure we're safe another way. How in the blazes did she know that? Was she a mind-reader devil spirit or something? Either way, she was threatening to tell everyone unless Cullen granted her every bit of power she'd always desired. Even if she didn't know the full truth of the matter, just causing a ruckus about some kind of danger would make Lord Cernier suspect he had failed to uphold his end of the deal, and then everything would be ruined. There was no way out. Cullen had lost. Fine. Take your coin. He held out the little emerald token reluctantly, and she snatched it up without any hesitation. She smiled and gave a thumbs up to her mother, who returned the gesture. Ugh, was this all part of some sort of vengeance for the broken flagons? Listen, Tharina. You may be a wretched fly on the wall, but you haven't sunk to the depths of a filthy liar. Don't prove my expectations right. You got that? Don't worry, I've got what I need, so I'll do you one better. She grabbed 2 decently sized bottles in each hand and set them on the table. This all means a lot to me, so have some of our cider on the house. For a moment, Cullen's opportunistic sensibilities and his spiteful pride battled for control, but Snuffler's pleading eyes left him walking out of the brewery with a couple extra gallons of booze under his arms. Thanks for the business. We'll be looking forward to your return. Her voice carried on the air with greater strength than Cullen had hoped.
It was still ringing in his ears even after purchasing a cart and getting swarmed by several dozen villagers, every one of them asking questions and lauding his newfound wealth. In any other situation, he would have enjoyed this very much, but now he was aware of every word that left his mouth, and every questioning theory that rose in reply. He was fearful at each of the mutterings that were whispered from Mr. Marshall the miller to his wife, detailed stories passed between the children that wondered about dangers in the mountains he'd been sent to poison, and the dozens of others that were directly spoken. Was he searching for the entrance to an ancient ruin? No, he was sent to discover the immortal seed in the heart of the mountain. If he leaves now, he'll get frostbite, or the frosty wolves will bite him. Many were very far from the truth, but some of them, like Ivy's prodding concern, were getting dangerously close. Is something threatening the feast? The scrawny fellow asked him, cradling his hornpipe. Something from the other side of the mountains. If Cullen was as careless as he'd been in the brewery, he may as well wave all his hopes farewell as they flew away into the empty ether, uplifted by the gossiping words in the village. Nevertheless, Cullen smiled and joked with all of them, throwing out vague hints that pointed nowhere in particular as he traveled about the village, purchasing a good amount of assorted foods, scented animal wards, new tools, tinderboxes, fabric, and refined goods like soap and candles. These were everything his father would need to be safe and comfortable, and everything that he could use on a trip through the mountains at the cusp of winter. Considering he had no idea how long the journey through unknown lands might take, he purchased a couple of extra satchels, one of which was fairly spacious and fit squarely on his back, filling them to the brim with dried meat, rope, and blankets. Alongside them, he picked up a long dagger and lake wolf deterrent powder of intense spices and wood splinters. These would only be for emergencies with a hungry beast who had not yet fallen into its cold slumber, he told the surrounding villagers and himself, but his mind kept thinking back to the first encounter with the 4 outsiders. It would only be for emergencies. Just life and death emergencies. By the time he had finished his shopping and stepped off the cobbled streets, there was an entourage of nearly 100 Carfelians, and even a few Jennerites all waving him farewell, and wishing him luck on his journey and mission. Though he couldn't place the names of more than 10, he had spoken to every one of them at length over the years. It had mostly been to get better deals by making his return a special occasion for everyone, but after double-checking the harness on Snuffler and ensuring that the cart wasn't too heavy for her, he glanced back and felt the same lump in his throat that he'd felt twice today now manifest once more. Again, he wondered why, but in the same moment the answer called at him from within. At some point, part of his mask must have broken off and pierced his soul, letting loose his young and foolish desires. He had let down his defenses in the wild rush of occurrences over the last few weeks, and now the villagers couldn't be seen as just as simple and separate people to be slowly freed from the Jennite grasp. They were friends, family even. He didn't like it, any of it. Not the weakness that it revealed in him which even Thurina had yet to snoop out, nor the overwhelming desire to protect them even beyond the veil. If it was left unchecked, it would be impossible to sate. For the more that others became close friends and companions, the more it would hurt when they left this valley and entered the next. To then shear such people from all thought and memory was more painful than any injury, even if it was for their sake. He'd known this for so long, way back when he had entered the mountains for the first time over 10 years ago. Back when he felt nothing but desperation and feverish dread. Back when he still searched in vain hope throughout the weeks after she disappeared. He shook his head and focused on the mission, and how excited his father would be upon hearing of the wealth and the next steps in the plan that had so fortuitously advanced. If he continued to think about her, then her spirit would be disturbed and torn between the 2 valleys, so he had to ignore such memories. Soon he would be back in the mountains, and the peace he loved so much would return. Just a few more hours, and all would be back to rights. Clarity and focus and control would be back in his grasp. He had to hold on until then. Snuffler grunted happily as Cullen scratched the top of her head, though her huff had a bit of exertion at the weight of the cart. Sorry, girl. Lost in thought for a bit. I'll help you out. Sound good? With that, he began the hour-long trek, pushing the cart through the hilly countryside and the crimson woods storming with leaves dancing to the rush of chilly and refreshing wind from the peaks. As the fleeting artistry of nature crunched beneath the wheels and hooves, drowning out everything else, Cullen breathed a sigh of relief. The only 2 he needed to keep safe were in front of him. Just one old man and one mountain boar, and he would do everything in his power to ensure their continued safety, no matter what his long journey tomorrow would reveal. The tiny valley where Cullen's father lived lay hidden deep within the hilly reaches beyond the village. Only someone with the proper information could easily find it, and Cullen had ensured that only a tiny handful of trusted individuals, mainly Yeeg and his family, held such precious knowledge. One had to pass through a small cave that lay at the end of an unassuming forest path, the latter standing several dozen feet off of the old road to Traveler's Pass to begin with. It was a path in name alone, really, as it was just wide enough to accommodate a single wagon that would brush against the low branches. The cave was simple enough to traverse, but a few parts were too dark for the way forward to be seen without a torch or memory to guide. Cullen always felt an increasing sense of comfort as every step along this secretive path brought him deeper and deeper into this secure slice of the valley, where only the beasts could intrude, and even they were prevented from accessing the sanctum of the spring cave. This sense of comfort was shattered when he saw a large overturned cart blocking the exit of the cave. A cart he certainly hadn't used. He rushed forward, past a confused Snuffler who was pawing at heavy treads on the ground. This cart had been very full when it arrived, and its contents must have been emptied within. Yeeg had told him he would be busy with his delivery and preparation of the cider bread back home, so if not him, who had done this? It was perfectly slotted into the cave mouth so that even a rodent would have trouble passing by, but Cullen was able to grab the axles and pull it backwards. He spun it as it fell and then pushed it into the secluded valley, partially to get it out of the way for Snuffler, mostly to get in as quickly as he could. He had to make sure his father was safe. Cullen saw the wooden walls on either side of the hut rise before him, with no marks or oddities marring any of the structures from what he could see, and there didn't seem to be any. A loud pop of a cork sounded from one of the bowers near the cliffside opposite to the hut and the cave, and the delicious scent of a roasting dire duck struck him harder than any charging mountain boar ever could. After a brief flash of hungering excitement, reality struck. There was no way his father would be capable of preparing something like a feast on his own. Someone else was definitely here. Stories of vicious bandits flashed through his mind, but they had all been outside of the valley. Were the newcomers? No, they were still incredibly far away, and the cart had been of Carfelian make. He quickly unlatched Snuffler, whispering, "Find him, quick!" While Snuffler dashed off towards the smells and sounds, hopefully for the reasons he'd requested, Cullen rushed to the door to see if his father or anyone else was hiding within. Could the intruder be one of the Jenner Knights? A Carfelian spy? Was this all a plan to silence him and his father? Then why the roast? Cullen swiftly slid the edge of his pick along the gap to flip the door latch, only to find that it was already unlocked. There was no one inside, and the house had been emptied of its furniture. Before any sense of rage or fear could consume him, Snuffler's excited squeal instantly signaled where he should be looking, and the responding laughter from the glade allayed all his fears in a moment. He bolted towards the shaded western cliffside, and found that the glade now held the table and chairs from the house, the former of which had been filled with the makings of a small feast. As Cullen looked down, the horror passed, and he sighed in relief.
"Ah, you're back! Welcome home, welcome home!"
His father waved from his seat, where Snuffler had flopped onto the ground, though she seemed torn between the platter of ripe apples near the drooping tree and the belly scratches she was receiving right now. The whole place had been spruced up with banners and colored lanterns, weaving in and out of the close-knit branches, and making the whole place feel like it was out of a dream. "Are you all right? And how did you do this? This is incredible." Snuffler bumped past his legs, having made her decision, and nearly toppling him as he reached up to touch one of the silken tapestries to see if it was some sort of misty illusion.
"It's not often I can surprise you anymore, but with a little help from Yeeg and that family of his, even your old man can work a little wonder. They even said they'd bar the way from any lake wolf interested in such a scent till you got back."
He got up and moved over to greet his son, and a strike of pity rushed through Cullen as he saw the old man's cane arm wobble more than ever. "It looks absolutely wonderful. But hold on a moment, you don't need to push yourself." Cullen gave his father a warm greeting hug, carefully ensuring that he didn't squeeze too tightly, and he helped him to sit down in his chair. To his surprise, it had been propped up a bit, an extra beam of wood having been nailed onto the underside. The light powdering of sawdust showed that this was likely another gift from Yeeg, whose hastened plans mentioned at the brewery must have been these efforts, and Cullen felt relieved all over again that his father would be in such safe hands. Had they done this just because of an overzealous desire to pay back for the promised wealth? Even if that were so, there was no way a dire duck had been smoked in such a short time, much less bringing it and everything else here and then leaving so soon that Cullen hadn't even encountered them on the path back. This had been planned in advance, but why? Did they say why they kept quiet about this, or how come they chose today of all days? Shrugging, he replied,
"Not in detail. Yeeg just waved off any questions, only saying that he wanted to have us experience a celebrational feast, just like everyone else will. Then his kid, little Mick, I think, the boy with the sunny-colored hair that's always tousled like a storm, said it was because you're going away again. Is that so, lad?"
Cullen hesitated for a moment, wishing that his father would have had the chance to enjoy his and Snuffler's company before knowing that they were off so soon, then nodded.
Yeah, Mick was right. I'm sorry. I'll be leaving tomorrow, probably at first sunlight. So let's make the most of tonight.
So soon. I take it this is more than just a simple foraging expedition, huh?
It is, so I want to make sure you have everything you need. Have you been able to eat enough every day? Are you having trouble getting around the house? I want to help with anything I can before I go.
I'm fine, lad. Don't worry yourself. I just need to think about moving before I do it nowadays, but I can still reach my destination, sure as a shedding billy.
Cullen smiled. Hey, to add to what Mick said, I'll probably be gone for a little, maybe more so a while longer than usual on this journey, so I'll be as nannying as I want to before I'm gone. His father nodded slowly.
Aye, that I feared. And if that's the case, I won't have you leaving until you give me every tiny detail you can about this grand mission. Though I can see from that gleam in your eye that it's not foul tidings, but even fairer than I could come up with, even in all my stories.
Cullen was quickly slicing up the duck roast and pouring a healthy arrangement of vegetables and sauce over the whole thing, but he stopped for a second and thought. Well, I haven't been granted any immortality fruits from the icy wastes under the northernmost star, so I can't agree with that entirely. As he swiftly plated the first helpings, including a special platter for Snuffler, he chuckled. Though I suppose having a whole host of visiting merchants entering the valley for the first time in decades and scaring the skins off Lord Sernier's back is certainly pretty high up there. His father's eyes went wide, and Cullen felt a deep sense of relief in being able to finally share those tantalizing words, as well as no small amount of enjoyment from seeing the flashing gleam of excitement in his father's eyes. Yes, he'd promised Lord Cernier utter secrecy, but as far as he was concerned, his father was just as much part of him as his own left hand.
Merchants, you say? Oh, tell on. Were they the pasty-faced kind with all the clanging yellow wagons, or were they whisperers who talked to animals more than people?
He raised an eyebrow.
And you're sure they weren't monsters? We don't want another case of snakes slipping in again.
Don't worry about that. I'm pretty sure they're just humans. They do have big beards the size of a bloodfly nest, they wear glass-looking red and brown armor, and they're a little jumpy. But they've got hundreds of items unlike anything I've ever seen. Big lizards to pull wagons, loud flower traps, and lots of oversized tools, to name a few. Most importantly, the Genernites seemed utterly terrified of them. Those snakes are probably going to have the quota and double everyone's Cerny at the same time if they ever decide to leave the Citadel again. Snuffler had already finished her platter of apples soaked in cordial, and was bumping the table legs in an effort to get Cullen to step up and resupply her.
I can't say that I can remember any merchants who looked like that. Some had even bigger beards than any hive, to the point where you'd think they were sheep who'd learned to stand upright, but none of them that I saw typically wore armor.
His father paused to nearly inhale an entire leg of duck before continuing amidst bites.
Why, no one usually wears armor unless they want to pompously pose and prance about, or if they've got a fight on their hands, and I don't take it they expected you to be there to admire them.
No, not exactly. They seemed ready to face off against anything that startled them, which might have been me if Snuffler hadn't done such an excellent job of throwing them off my trail. He scratched her head, pouring more cordial into her bowl as she dug into her second plate of food. As it was, they haven't even seen me yet.
If they're skittish, then we can plan out your first meeting with them. In my youth, all the merchants loved to receive freebies more than anyone else, so giving these new fellows a welcome gift would be the best thing to get them fully on our side.
Cullen smiled, pleased to see that he'd taken the stories to heart so well. Those were my thoughts exactly, though I wasn't really sure what to give them before they almost caught sight of me. All I can think of now is something like this feast that Yeeg and the Russells generously prepared for us, but that would be tricky to facilitate all by ourselves.
Well, how many were there? If it was a handful of small families, a big pot of stew filled with all the best food in the valley will warm every outsider's heart. If they number closer to 50, then some of your best floral goodies should be enough.
See, that's where I think these fellows are a little different to the old kinds of merchants. Cullen paused for a moment, feeling a lingering concern rise once more. There's more than a few hundred, and maybe even double that since I didn't see any women or children in the forefront of their camp. His father sputtered as he set down his flagon in surprise.
What, that many? Surely you must have missed something, or you were counting shadows. That many merchants would double the whole village, if not the entire valley. They would have to be selling the most esteemed and expensive treasures unless they were aiming to break even with such an endeavor, and with the landslide they must be having the roughest of times simply getting here.
He swirled the liquid in the flagon in thought.
Are you certain these are merchants, lad? Did they have horns growing out of their heads or scales along the eyes?
Cullen laughed, though it sounded oddly hollow despite his best efforts. Considering they were quite flustered, even screaming like children upon finding a hive of bloodflies as any other person in the valley would, I don't see them being anything more than simple merchants, despite their numbers. Why, if any fear is felt upon seeing them, it's just irrational and brought on by surprise at their desperate attempts at seeming fearsome. Besides, I think there's a host of them there simply to assist in repairing the road, not to sell, so we'll only see a tiny group come over the mountains to meet with us, I'm sure. But, in any case, these guys couldn't possibly be monsters at all. Maybe they're squirrely monsters, if anything, with all the bushiness of their tails stuck to their face. In fact... His father waved his hand, motioning him to stop.
Well, don't go on about it forever. If they didn't seem aggressive, then they can't be any worse than the Genernites. Speaking of those snakes, if these newcomers are opening the pass again, then our overlords will have nothing to hold over our heads. He laughed a hearty laugh. It's been a long time since I've seen the road outside ready for traveling, and just the thought reminds me of better days. That many men is still concerning, considering they're all part of one faction, but I guarantee that when the road is complete, we'll see many more arrive from all parts of the world, so that not a one of them has enough sway to dominate the valley ever again.
Something about that made Cullen feel a bit of relief, and he shoved the fact that he had to feel relieved at all away as he added, Actually, there seem to be two groups among the Bushbeards, and they don't like each other very much from what I can tell. They had their camps built apart from each other, and they seem to get into a lot of disagreements, so I don't think we even need to worry about that part.
Well, there you have it. And considering how scared the Genries seem to be of them, I can't see any alliances forming between those two, especially if you get the first word in on both sides. We Valley Dwellers will be making it out on top.
Cullen fully relaxed at that, laying down in the grass with his cup held high. So it's a new era for all of us, and we'll welcome it in with a hearty helping of dire duck?
Yes, my boy. This is a celebrational feast of our very own. Not to the appeasement of the snakes, but to welcome in the new age that will bring about a golden future for every Carfelian.
They both cheered, and together, alongside Snuffler, they drained their drinks all at once. Cullen went over the entire venture in detail, giving his father everything that he needed to retell it to others down the stream of time. A record of the day that the fate of the valley changed would be wonderful to have, and it was rather fun describing every tremor in the hands and the voice of their so-called overlord. Even after the meal concluded, there were still several helpings of food left over. Cullen got right to work sealing up all the portions of the feast in some of the new jars and containers, his father assisting despite the boys' protests.
You said you wanted to make this night count, then you tried to send me off to rest. For shame, lad. I'll have you know that I could carry at least 2 full kegs when I was your age, and I haven't deteriorated so far as to lose all semblance of strength.
Despite such bravado, any more than a large jar proved to be a bit too difficult for him, but Cullen appreciated it nonetheless. Underneath all of it, his father was right. Everything Cullen did was for that peacefully joyful life together, so why ignore it? Once this job was done and the need to earn a living became a thing of the past, Cullen resolved to spend substantially more time with him. All the time, perhaps, if a second home might be built in the mountains. How such a thing might occur, he wasn't sure, but in this new era of constant surprise and good fortune, nothing could be counted out. By the time all of the supplies had been stored away and the furniture used for the feast was returned to the restored house, the sun's light had almost entirely faded. As he checked the last section of the wall, Cullen stifled a yawn. The exhaustion had begun to catch up with him, but he easily had another few hours before it would become unbearable. He often had to remain on the move during sudden snowstorms or while foraging near roaming beasts, so despite Snuffler's usual protests, he could stay awake for nearly 2 days if need be. Speaking of Snuffler, she was scraping her tusks against the cavern wall in her favorite section, worn down over the years to a nice glistening sheen. As he whistled for her to follow him back to the house, she grunted rebelliously and remained there for a little longer. He smiled. She'd probably miss this place even more than he would. Never mind, take your time. Everything we'll need fits pretty nicely into that new back satchel, though it can't hurt to have a little extra food. Would you mind carrying those and the other 2 tomorrow, Snuff? She seemed to grunt an affirmative, though it was hard to tell while she was still sharpening. He nodded in reply and returned to the house, but as he closed the door behind him, the very atmosphere felt different. The silence was almost solemn. Before he could say anything, his father harumphed from the shadowy corner.
What took you so long, lad? Never mind. You're here now, at least.
He was sitting down in his chair, slightly rocking back and forth. Cullen thought he looked a little more reserved and introspective than usual, with his soft glare mottled by squinting wrinkles.
The mountain tops can be treacherously dangerous, but the lands beyond can make them seem like a field of soft beds and cradled kittens. More than ever, you'll need the full breadth and depth of all the blessings I know.
He motioned with his walking stick towards the middle shelf of the cabinet.
There should be a small box with a blue bird's image on the cover in there. Take it out and bring it to me.
Cullen nodded slowly and went over to the old wooden thing that, though pristine, was racked with the scars of lost days. This was where his father kept his personal mementos, secret objects that even Cullen was forbidden to see. He knew why, and so he opened the drawer with shaking hands. Sure enough, the box was right there on the top. Cullen refrained from looking at anything else, taking it and closing the drawer as quickly as he could. As he handed it to his father, the old man's hands worked quickly, flipping the latches and turning a hidden knob. The lid popped open, and he picked up an object that had been hidden within. It was a small ebony stone. Though Cullen immediately thought it looked jagged and dented, after a moment it was clear that every imperfection was intentionally crafted in a way that would mystify any Carfelian smith. In the single hole on the side of the stone, a thin chain was strung, so fine that it appeared to be made of metal silk as it lay in a spiral. As his father held it up, it took the form of a pendant, and the stone glistened in the smoldering firelight. In that mottled reflection of dark light, Cullen saw a beauty unmatched by any other gem or glasswork in the whole valley.
"This is the secret sigil of our family, passed down for as long as can be remembered. It was said to have a bit of the powers that were spoken of in some of my stories, but such magic is long lost today. It is to be given to the next generation only when they are on the cusp of their greatest moment. For me, it was when my fate changed forever on the day of my marriage."
He handed it over to Cullen, who held it with wide eyes.
"For you, it shall be the day you forever change the fate of everyone in the valley."
Cullen's mouth was dry. Thank you, Father." This stone was made by no storyteller. He clutched it tight.
"You should know that's one of a kind, so no selling it, you hear? I'd just about up and die upon hearing that."
He chuckled, and it changed into a long sigh.
"You'll do great things, Cullen. I know it. Now get some rest. May the Night Watcher be your friend, and keep you in her umbra for all slumbers you have."
"And may the Shivering Seeker find you frowning at him for many a year. Good night, Father."
"Aye, good night."
Though the bed was soft, and both Snuffler and his father's snores were familiarly loud, Cullen had trouble falling asleep. He kept going over all of the traveling equipment in his head, all the connections he made in the village, all the ways that this journey could end with glorious triumph, with unmarred victory. Nothing else could happen, nothing at all. He wouldn't disappear and never be spoken of again, for his future only held a heroic return. He had nearly convinced himself, but as he tossed about, his eyes caught a glimpse of a chillingly familiar object resting, or growing, out of the floorboards, and he froze. How could that be? It was still nestled in a safe culvert in his satchel. He leapt out of the bed to grab the red bulb, but he was too late. It blossomed, and the plume of fiery smoke shot upwards, contorting and sparking as it took the form of a woman. As her attention seized upon him, the dancing face incorporeal but for the eyes gleaming with crimson lightning, he felt his throat close up in fear and terrible recognition. Then the instant had passed, and the smoke shattered the roof with a flash, splintering the beams into sparkling sprites of flame. As the sides caved in onto Snuffler and his father, Cullen could do nothing but cry out in warning and terror. It echoed in the suddenly dark and very intact house, no crimson flower or flame in sight, but neither Snuffler nor his father woke at the sound, though the boar did jostle a little, smacking her lips. Cullen found that his pillow was soaked in sweat, and that the darkness beyond the windows had advanced to the slightest gleam of light from the eastern peaks. Though his heart was still pounding, all exhaustion gone and replaced by the pulsing of fiery and invigorated blood, the sense of relief that freed his throat was unlike any he'd ever felt. And yet, the spark that had grown to a destructive inferno continued to dance about in his head. "I have to go. Now." He had finished whispering that to himself before the thought had even crossed his mind, but following it was the only thing that felt right. He scooped up the back satchel and rocked Snuffler gently. "Come on, girl, we're off." She blinked, but seemed to understand. As she got up and stretched, Cullen looked over at his sleeping father. Oh, how he desperately wanted to say goodbye, but something in the depths of his soul cried out against it, against the finality it seemed to entail. Snuffler passed by the stove on the way to the door, and a lump of charcoal crumbled apart within it. As it settled again, Cullen had an idea. He grabbed the tongs and carried the still warm lump to the door. He stopped for a second to visualize the words. He had rarely ever used what he'd been taught so long ago, but this was as important of a use as ever there would be for the way of writing. He script the words on the log over the doorway in as accurate of a way as his hands would allow,
though they jolted too far and not far enough with every other letter. Soon his work was complete, and he wiped his brow in satisfaction as he looked at the short sentence, this promise to his father and to himself. "I'll say farewell on my return." As he read over his handiwork, Cullen smiled. He would make sure these words were truly kept, no matter what. It was now written, and anything written was in some way permanent, somehow unequivocally real. Just as any story told to another, or a firm action taken with pride, it now existed in the world, and there wouldn't be a time when it never existed again. As he stepped out into the chill of the early morning, he raised his hands high, stretching with a wide grin on his face. Snuffler was waiting, grunting impatiently as he attached the other satchels to her. "Sorry about that, Snuff. It had to be done." He didn't look back as they walked into the cavern leading out into the valley, but he felt at the chain hanging from his neck and the little stone unlike anything else that pressed against his chest. After all, we don't want to keep the new era waiting any longer.